We were in support of Alpha Company 1st of the 7th. I'm very proud to say that was the old Hal Moore unit that had been in the Idrang Valley. Books have written about that, and Hal Moore is one of the greatest soldiers I have ever met and had the pleasure to serve with. He was no longer in command of that battalion. I think he'd rotated by then, but it was Alpha Company 1st of the 7th on the ground. And they weren't on the ground 3 minutes, and we began to hear them talk to each other and the machine gun chatter in the background. So now we know we've got a hot situation. On a normal day, if you will, if there's such a thing, they might be on the ground 10, 15, 20 minutes and no contact of any kind whatsoever, and they'd say, Falcon, Roger, thanks for the insert, RTB, return to base. They don't need us anymore. But this day, within about 3 to 5 minutes, they made contact. The intel guys knew what they were doing, and they put them in a hell of a hornet's nest. And so we got very busy, taking out these targets that were knocking down our infantry guys in the elephant grass and the tree lines. It was getting very, very busy, and the company commander called up and he said, Falcon, he said, I need medevac down here. He said, I got about 4 bleeders. Medic can't get them stopped. Got to get them out of here. Well, one of my rocket runs after adjusting, I'm pulling up, and I flipped over to what we call dust off, the medevac frequency, and I said, we need dust off at LZ Eagle, Toot Sweet. There were about 2 other companies in that valley that day, and they'd also made contact, and it was just a real hornet's nest. And he came back and said, Roger, Falcon, understand, relay to Alpha Company Commander, it'll be about 2-0 before we can get there. Well, I fired some more rockets, adjusting them, and it's very busy what you're doing up there. Relayed to the company commander on the ground, it'd be 20 minutes before we could, dust off could come in. I've never heard or felt such a response over a radio, but I think his exact words were, Roger, thank you, understand, but we may have to bag them here. That means body bags. Something I need to interject here, it was absolutely forbidden, regulations, SOP, tactical requirements. No gunships like mine were ever to land in what's called a hot LZ, which is what they had down there. The reason being, in this Bravo and sometimes Charlie model Hueys, we had every radio conceivable. I could talk to the B-52s. I could talk to the naval gunfire guys as an artillery officer. In fact, I adjusted naval gunfire a number of times. I could call in the Phantoms with the napalm. I had all the radios in the world. We had these 48 rocket pods with what's called an intervalometer, the electronics that could fire 1 pair, 2 pair, 3 pair. And if the LZ got overrun and I was down there, they would get all those goodies. They would get the keys to the kingdom. And that's why it was a good regulation. It was a good rule. It was made for good reasons. And I knew that our battalion commander was somewhere in the area that day listening in on all these different battles that were going on. So I couldn't say anything over the air. But when he said that, we may have to bag them here, as I said, this unique frequency that military people have with each other, particularly in air crew. I looked around the cockpit, door gunner, crew chief, co-pilot, thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. My next transmission was back to, I think it was White Fox 16. I said, break, change that. I said, we got a medevac, about a half a mile final coming in from the south. Lay down all the suppressive fire you can. Let's get them in, let's get them out. He came back and he said, Falcon, all I see is you lining up on a short final. Yeah, I can see the rocket pods, your door gunner and crew chief hanging out the sides. he's saying things I don't want him to say. And I came back, I said, negative, negative, Fox. You see a big D model Huey with a red cross on the side of it coming in to pick up your men because I'm not allowed to land here. Well, I'm sure this guy was from West Point because he got it just like that. He came back, oh, Roger, now I see the medevac with the big red cross on it. Well, we went shooting in there, and his guys slid these guys on the rear deck of the helicopter, and we got out of there. My wingman understood it too. He gave me all the suppressive fire he could. We took 17 rounds in the aircraft that day. And amazingly, none of us were touched, not the guys in the back or any of our crew. I went as fast as that Huey would take us to a little MASH hospital that was out there like about 4 minutes away. I called into them. I told them I had 4 acute, get them out here. The med-surg teams were there. They rushed out to the helipad when we came in. They offloaded these guys. Then one of the techs came around to my side of the window and he said, sir, he said, we didn't get any call sign from you when you came in to land. And he says, I have your tail number here on the clipboard, but I need your call sign. And I took the paper off the clipboard and ripped it out of his hands. And I said, I was never here. And we got out of there. Another interesting part of the story is now I got to go back to this fire base. And I got all these bullet holes in the aircraft. I got all this blood in the back seat. And yet, none of us were hit by anything. And I'm not allowed to land in a hot LZ. How am I going to explain all this? So there was a little river that ran about a mile from the fire base that had some sandbars on it that was above ground. And we'd been there before to just watch the helicopter. So we went shooting in there. All 4 of us jumped out of the helicopter and grabbed our steel pots and began dipping it in the river, sloshing it in the back seat to clean out all the blood, and then quick jump back in and go back to our fire base. And, you know, the mechanics and the maintenance guys came out and, oh my God, where have you been? What did you do? And I said, well, you know, it's just busy out there today, business as usual. What happened as a result of this, my whole crew was highly decorated, and they certainly deserved it. I was called in about a month later to the battalion commander's office. And he said, Lieutenant McAlister, he said, you're aware of the regulations about no landing in a hot LZ? Well, absolutely, sir. He said, well, I hold here in my hand a write-up from Alpha Company 1st to 7th commander who says that on December so-and-so, you landed in the middle of LZ, picked up 4 of his men, medevaced them, got them to the hospital. All 4 of them survived only due to your quick action and leadership and blah, blah, blah. What do you have to say about that? I said, well, sir, you and I both know the regulations. That's not possible, and I couldn't have done that. And he said, so in other words, this recommendation for Distinguished Flying Cross, I've got to kick it back down to him, and this never happened. I said, yes, sir, this never happened. Whew, thought it went away. About 4 months later, I get called back into his office again. And he says, now, Captain McAlister, I've been promoted. He said, this LZ Eagle 1st to the 7th thing just won't go away. And I said, well, what do you mean, sir? He said, well, he says that company commander, as I say, it must have been a West Pointer, you know, he wrote up a new version of what happened there that day, saying that they had 4 people that were critical and that you flew low and slow as a decoy over the enemy machine gun positions, drawing their fire so that the medevac helicopter could land and load these people. And you again flew low and slow over the enemy machine gun positions, getting a total of 17 hits in their government property. to allow the medevac plane to then disembark and save their lives. Is that what happened? Yes, sir, I remember something like that. And he said, well, I have one other problem. I said, well, what is that, sir? He says, back in my office, I got a hard stripe Sergeant E5 named Donald Frederick. He was one of those 4 guys. And the last thing he remembers, as they were carrying him out in that poncho, sliding him into the back of some helicopter, was he looked up and he remembered the tail number. I can't remember what it is today, but like 650429. And he just had that etched in his memory. Well, he was patched up here, flew back to the States, had some R&R, volunteered to re-up, to come back for another tour in Vietnam, if he could be the door gunner on 654029 for the guy that pulled him out of the jungle. What do you say about that? And I said, well, sir, I said, you know, when the medics treat these guys out in the field, they hit them up with morphine pretty heavy, and they're all loopy and crazy, and you know, maybe he saw me on that low pass going over, and that's what he thought it was. And he said, Captain, he said, I imagine that if I marched your co-pilot, your crew chief, and your door gunner in here, they'd tell me the same pack of lies, wouldn't they? And I said, yes, sir, I'm sure they would. And he said, you have a new door gunner, and at 1400 hours this afternoon, you are to report to division headquarters, where the 2-star Major General himself is going to pin this decoration on you. And I think you need to take your new door gunner with you. So I have a picture of that, Major General Casey, who was then the division commander of the 1st Cav, pinning that decoration on me. And standing right behind me is Sergeant Frederick. And as he's doing that, he looks over at Sergeant Frederick and he said, Sergeant, he said, you should be real proud to be able to fly with an officer like Captain McAlister. Frederick had a great sense of humor too. You know, he kind of leaned forward and saluted, and he said, yes, sir. He said, you have no idea. I have many treasures, and I call them that I brought back from Vietnam. I've got pieces of shrapnel. I've got empty 7.62 cases, a couple 105 artillery pieces, and lots of other things. But I have one thing that is my #1 treasure, and it's a painting done by a guy named Joe Klein, who was an infantry trooper in Vietnam. Began to sketch over there, came back to the States, and became a pretty prolific painter. And about 30 years ago, through the magic of the internet, on a 1st Cav website, I was able to hook up with Sergeant Donald Frederick. And we emailed and did things like that, and then we began to talk on the phone and got reacquainted and shared, you know, what our lives had been like, you know, the 20 years after Vietnam. And he was so moved by, you know, getting us reacquainted that he knew about this artist, and he contacted him and he said, I wonder if I told you a story about what happened to me in Vietnam, do you think you could turn that into a picture? And he said, tell me the story. So Sergeant Frederick told him the story that I've shared with you, and Joe Klein put together an absolutely perfect picture of our helicopter, my name on the side, the door gunner's name, which is hard to see, Sergeant Donald Frederick underneath that, our 48 rocket pods, my wingman behind me, some white phosphorus that we'd shot onto the ground, you know, a burning LZ, and that came rolled up in a tube to me several months after Sergeant Frederick and I got reacquainted. I opened it up, and I have to tell you, I burst into tears. It just brought back so many memories of friends, other pilots, crew chiefs, members that I had lost over there. And my wife, the great artist she took it to a professional framer, had it framed. It hangs in a spot in our home of honor. The rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would tell you, is that we continued to talk over the telephone every couple weeks. And I noticed a change of the tone of voice. I noticed kind of a weakness in Don Frederick, Sergeant Frederick. And I said, hey, buddy, talk to me. What's going on? And I said, you really sound bad. And, you know, yeah, you've had the cold and the flu now for about 5 months. And he said, Captain, he still called me Captain. He said, yeah, I got cancer. I said, how bad is it? He said, it's bad. He said, next week I'm going to hospice. And I said, where are you going? Give me the address and so forth. So I flew to New Orleans where he was living. And I spent 5 days with him. Certainly all day long. And yeah, at nighttime when he'd be on meds and so forth, I'd go back to a motel. I left after 5 days. He died about 5 days after that. And so maybe you see why this picture is such a treasure to me. I'm still alive. My co-pilot's still alive. The crew chief is still alive today. We're all old dogs, but we're here, and Sergeant Frederick has gone ahead to prepare the next LZ for all of us.
Roger, Falcon 6. This is Falcon 7 Alpha, Romeo Tango Bravo. Over.